Would you vote if that would save the planet? I've always loved nature and animals. As a child, I dreamt of becoming a vet. In high school, living in Norway, just outside of Oslo, I was chosen to take home 2 chickens that hatched in our biology class. I won the lottery! I got to take home 2 yellow, fluffy baby chicks. Riding on the train, they went, chirp, 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 all the way home, in a shoebox on my lap. It was late fall, no snow yet, but so cold. We built a makeshift pen for them in the basement. Next to the furnace, it was nice and warm. I had the job of feeding them, cleaning the pen, and eventually collecting fresh eggs. And of course, I had to pet them. In the spring, we built a pen for them in the garden. As I led them out of the basement for the first time, 2 young white hens followed me into the garden as if I was their mother hen. I was honored. These hens lived to the ripe old age of 8. Years later, I met Jane Goodall, the British primatologist. That was in South Africa. I was attending the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. There was a field trip to Soweto to listen to Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, and Dr. Goodall. Catching her on the way up the hill to the event, I had to breathe deeply, calm down. I was so nervous to speak with her. She's contributed so much to our understanding of the chimpanzees, and more recently, she speaks about climate change and loss of biodiversity. She's an inspiration for many of us. I'm worried about climate change. Are you? I first learned about climate change during my studies of international environmental law. The reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change expressed scientific consensus that the burning of fossil fuels is the primary driver of human-caused climate change. That scientific consensus has strengthened with each new report that's come out. When I was teaching at the University of Denver at the law school, I decided to create a seminar named Global Climate Change Law Policy to teach the students about this growing challenge. People I met outside of the classroom were not aware of climate change. They were confused, not surprisingly, by most of the news media presenting 2 sides of the story, even though the basics of climate change is settled science, just like gravity. Imagine the fossil fuel industry denied climate change, cast doubt on the science, and created confusion using the same playbook as the tobacco industry had done. Disinformation campaigns. Just Google Professors Naomi Oreskes and Michael Mann. They and many others have uncovered these facts and written books and articles on it. I was surprised and angry when I found out the fossil fuel industry had the scientific knowledge but denied it to mislead the public. The fossil fuel industry and other vested interests are still lobbying to delay action on climate change. I had to do more to get the word out on climate change. That's it, I said to my husband. as we sat in a diner in Denver. I'm notifying the university I'm not returning next term. Saying those words, I realized I was not pursuing the career I'd worked so hard to build with so many, many years of studying. I was scared. My heart was beating. It felt like it was exploding. Since people don't read scientific reports, and the news media got it backwards, I figured people still read novels. Are you a fan of novels? I sure am. I decided to write a riveting thriller with climate change as part of the plot to get the word out to broader audience. I'd only written dry law journal articles. No emotions there. So I dove into creative writing classes to learn to write compelling fiction. 4 years later, after finding a publisher and seeing my book on the market with good reviews, I was elated, so thrilled. Yet people still didn't get it. I'd specified in my book that the science had been verified by a climate scientist. But I met a man who loved my book, but insisted climate change was caused by sunspots. Fiction, indeed. I was running out of more ways. What more ways could I come up with? I was totally running out of thoughts on how to deal with this. I wanted to scream. We're not doing enough to address climate change. What else can we do to address this catastrophic problem on a system-wide scale? I became a U.S. citizen in 2020 and voted in the presidential elections. It was then I understood the immense power of voting. And I realized that combining voting with climate change in the sense of voting for candidates at all levels, local, state, and federal, who make the climate crisis their top priority, could be a game changer. As individuals, we recycle, mount solar panels on our roofs, and buy EV cars if we can afford it. And that's wonderful. But it's not enough now. Science tells us we have to do much more, much faster. We need to transition to a low-carbon economy. And we need to make changes at all levels of society. I'll let that sink in for a moment. Changes at all levels of society. I have the solution. Vote. Vote for candidates that actually care about climate change. By voting for candidates that make climate change not just a priority, but their top priority, we build the political will that's been lacking to urgently address climate change. And that will reduce the influence of the ones opposed to taking action. Candidates funded by the fossil fuel industry and other vested interests would not be elected. We can't do this. Science and research shows us that politicians respond to what the voters want. A Pew Research study shows us that 2/3 of Americans, yes, 2/3 of Americans, actually want the federal government to do more on climate change. And most researchers agree that the adoption of renewable energy policies actually depends on citizen support. Science is a heavy-duty thing to be reading. I get that. Some people are still sitting on the fence. But now that we know climate change is happening, we have to act much faster across the board, which is more likely to happen if you vote. At the local level, if you vote, by voting for candidates who prioritize climate change, the school board would add climate change to the curriculum. Town councils would pass local laws to increase energy efficiency in certain buildings. At all levels, politicians prioritizing climate change would adopt policies and pass laws to introduce laws to cut greenhouse gas emissions and allocate funding for renewable energy. Large programs at the state and federal level addressing climate change would be quickly implemented. And subsidies from fossil fuels would be transferred to renewable energy. Programs accelerating a just transition for everyone, including coal, oil, and gas workers, would be given priority. We can avoid more frequent and intense extreme weather events. And we have a much better chance at a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren if we make rapid changes by voting for candidates at all levels who make the climate crisis their top priority. It's easy to be overwhelmed by climate change. Many of us are experiencing the impacts of climate change right now. There are things we can do. Voting is one of the most important. Voting is more effective if you examine what the candidates are actually doing to fight climate change. Here are 3 steps you can take to choose wisely. Number 1, vote for candidates who are committed to sponsoring bills to reduce greenhouse gases. Examine their websites. Check out their social media platforms. Number 2, vote for candidates who support policies promoting incentives to invest in renewable energy. Number 3, vote for candidates who do not get any funding from the fossil fuel industry and other vested interests. Follow the money. Talk to other voters, young and old, about supporting candidates prioritizing climate change. By voting, we create hope. And your vote makes a difference, ensuring a just and rapid transition to renewable energy for all. Jane Goodall once said, "We cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around us. What you do makes a difference, and you need to decide what kind of difference you want to make."